The crossroads at midnight was no place for a man to linger. Yet, Edward stood there as though he had been placed by hands not his own. The earth was wet with the memory of rain, and the moon's pale face hung low, filtering through the fog that lay like a funeral shroud across the ground. 4 dirt roads stretched outward into nothingness, each promising only solitude and the weight of silence. At the center of it all waited her, the siren. A long coat hung off her shoulders, stitched from shadows and midnight fabric, her smile the sharpened curve of a blade. Eyes that had witnessed centuries flickered with playful malice as she leaned against the weathered signpost. For years, travelers had sought her here, begged her for fortune, cursed her when they found the price. She had been the predator of desperate men, the broker of twisted desires. But tonight, the air held a strangeness she could not name. Edward moved toward her with the hesitancy of a sleepwalker, his boots crunching on gravel that seemed to echo longer than it should. His face bore no hunger, no greed, only that pale vacancy of one driven by command, a servant of something he himself could not name. When he reached her, he held out both hands, cupping a small object wrapped in black velvet. "Gift," he said simply, his voice hollow, as though borrowed. Siren arched a brow.
"What is this?"
When she drew back the cloth, the knight recoiled. It was a marble, small enough to hide in a child's fist, but within it pulsed infinity. Galaxies spun like gnats around unblinking voids. Glyphs flared and shifted, rearranging into patterns no human tongue could pronounce. Fractals rose and fell in impossible folds, a geometry that writhed when stared at too long. Behind it all, the black shimmer of chaos breathed, and in its wake the fog thickened, trembling as though it were alive. She whispered despite herself,
"A gift? For me? That is rare."
Edward only shook his head. "Not mine to say, not mine to know." Her lips parted with a retort, but the words caught and died in her throat. The marble called to her, and she felt it in her chest, pulling on something deeper than bone and blood. Every deal she had ever struck, every soul ever bound by her clever tongue, now seemed like shadows of a greater bargain yet to be written. For the first time in uncounted years, choice was placed in her hands, not as hunter, but as prey. When she finally tore her gaze away from the thing, the man had gone. Or had he even been there in the first place? The marble pulsed in her hand, demanding her attention. And with each beat, Siren became aware of whispers that were not her own, the voices of her bargains. The merchants, thieves, widows, lovers, and kings rose like a congregation beneath her skin. Every deal she had ever made was inscribed in their souls. Every signature a chain that ran back to her. And now all those chains rattled in unison, tugged by the black weight she held. And now their faces began to press through the fog. Not flesh or ghost, but impressions burned into memory and regret. She saw the man who wanted to be the best fiddle player the world had ever known, his hands forever trembling on strings that cut deeper than music. She saw the broken woman who had bartered for revenge, her eyes hollow even as she clutched the bloodied blade that never dulled. The demon who thought himself greater than the dealmaker appeared, his grin shattered into an eternal scream as the marble mocked his arrogance. A man who yearned only for love stood there too, his heart a glowing ember clenched in his hands that burned him with every beat. The woman with the tortured mind, whose thoughts never ceased their screaming, begged for silence that never came. Another who wanted companionship, who would never again endure solitude, stood shackled to phantoms that whispered endlessly. And lastly, a failed knight, armor rent and rusted, his vow broken on the battlefield of his own weakness. They were all here, all of them, her Fausts. The marble throbbed, and the chains connecting them to her quivered like strings on some great unseen instrument. She realized then that it had never been about her power, her cunning, her dominion. She had been a keeper of debts, not a queen of souls. The marble was the true ledger, and tonight it had come to collect. The paths at the crossroads split and bled into infinity, and Siren understood. The marble would take all. Her bargains, her triumphs, her failures, her flock of desperate and damned, all of them would be consumed into its swirling abyss. Ascend with them or surrender them into dissolution. Rise or unmake. The choice was hers, and hers alone. As she stood pondering, the marble seared her hand, the glyphs unraveling like veins of fire beneath her skin. The siren could not look away this time. The cosmos within it pulled her, folded her, demanded her answer. Around her, the air vibrated with the chained cries of her Fausts, their fractured faces overlapping into a chorus of desperation. They did not ask for freedom. They did not ask for damnation. They demanded resolution. And Siren, demon of the crossroads, temptress of mortal folly, made her choice. She pressed the marble into her chest. It sank through flesh and bone like water. For a heartbeat, she thought she had conquered it, that she had claimed its promise of ascension. Her body trembled as stars ignited in her veins, constellations blooming inside of her eyes. The chains of her Faust surged forward, snapping taut as if dragged into her rising form. She felt them all. Their lives, their deaths, their bargains, woven into her like threads of a tapestry meant to clothe a god. But then the tapestry unraveled. The marble was no crown. It was a mirror, and in it her true reflection writhed, a hollow broker, an empty vessel fattened on debts she had mistaken for dominion. The void had offered her agency only to test her worth, and now it judged her unfit. Glyphs burned across her skin, tearing lines of light through her body as if she were parchment aflame. Her collection of the damned shrieked as the chains dissolved into ash, their souls scattering like broken glass into the void. Freed not by her grace, but by her annihilation. The siren fell to her knees, her coat spilling like black water across the crossroads. The signpost behind her warped and cracked, its wooden arms pointing into directions that no longer existed. Her face, once cruel and flawless, peeled away into a mask of light. And then, nothing. The crossroads stood silent once more. No figure leaned against the post. No voices whispered in the dirt. Only a single black marble lay in the dust, its surface smooth, its galaxies unstilled.